What's up, fellow music nerds? Matrix here, and you are locked into the Matrix Music Review Podcast, the only place to get your alt-rock pop-punk music fix. And we are back with probably everybody's favorite time of year. I know it's one of my favorite times of year. And we are here with end-of-year lists, and this is going to be the first episode where we discuss the top 20 albums of the year. Definitely not an easy year to decide top albums this year. There were so many good releases this year and albums. There were so many good EPs this year. There were so many good songs this year. Alt-rock, pop-punk, emo, metalcore, whatever you want to call it, really showed up and showed out this year. It was an incredible year for this type of music, and I couldn't be happier to get together and try and come up with the top 20 albums this year. So before we jump in, let's start with some ground rules here. So these are just my top 20 albums. These are not the critic top 20 albums that you guys may see. These are not the, there may not be the standard, people on these lists. These are going to be who I thought had the top 20 albums this year. So don't think that this is just like some critic list. This is just my list. It's not perfect. I'm sure your list is going to be very different than mine, so keep that in mind when you're listening to my top 20 here. Secondly, there are a few albums that I'm going to just touch on really quickly that probably would have made it into the top 20 had I had more time to listen to them, and that's just because of when they were released. The first one that I need to talk about with that is UNWELL. Their new album is spectacular. I have been playing it nonstop, but I really couldn't justify putting it into a top 20 at the end of the year when I've really only had a little less than a month to kind of digest it and really have that much time with it. Same goes for Crooked Teeth. That's a band that I have a lot of faith in, and I see big things on the horizon for them. Their new album was really, really good, really strong. I just can't justify putting that one in. Same thing with LiL Lotus. LiL Lotus's new album was fantastic. That Nosebleeder album is one that has been playing a lot for me lately. So those three artists you won't hear in this top 20 or even in honorable mentions, but I felt like I needed to mention them to you guys off the top because those three have been spectacular. They just kind of came out a little later than I would have needed for them to be in my top 20, and I wasn't able to do a full review of them on a podcast because I've been so busy recently. So that's why you won't hear those three names on there. But we're going to go through 20 albums, my top 20, going 20 to 1, and you'll get some honorable mentions in there as well. And let's jump right in. I think it's time to jump right in and start talking about these top 20 albums. Coming in at number 20, we got So Much for Stardust by Fall Out Boy. This was probably the hardest album for me to both include and exclude from this list. Fall Out Boy's So Much for Stardust was an album that came out relatively close to the beginning of the year, and it's one that I don't really know how much I kept going back to it. There were certain songs that I kept going back to, but as a whole, this album wasn't one that I kept reaching for like I did some of these other ones that you're going to hear on this list. But when I really sat down and thought about it, I couldn't leave this album off the list because of the way that it kind of made me feel like Fall Out Boy returned to form. Fall Out Boy returning to form with So Much to Stardust is kind of this perfect way to kick off this pop-punk revolution that we really had this year, and how well that specific subgenre of our alt-rock scene did this year. You're going to hear me talk about it a lot, but pop-punk owned 2023. There is no way around it. When you talk about alt-rock genres, pop-punk was the top one this year, and I will go to war on that one with anybody because that is certainly the way I felt this year. And So Much for Stardust really helped kick that off because I think if Fall Out Boy would have came out flat on this album, I think it really would have kind of made people think that all right, maybe I don't need to pay attention to this genre much anymore, or, maybe this genre really is starting to die out. But, Love from the Other Side was the big single, and that was what kind of sparked our interest as to, okay, maybe this is the Fall Out Boy that we all grew up knowing to love. And don't get me wrong, there's still a few songs on that album that I probably could do without. What a Time to Be Alive definitely is not one of my favorites on there, but there's lyrical excellence on that album. The album sonically sounds great, and Fall Out Boy kind of returned to form. So I'm interested to see where they kind of go next, if they continue along that path or if they kind of detour and go back to that more popish sound and go for that radio airplay. So number 20 is So Much for Stardust by Fall Out Boy. Coming in at number 19, we have Prius Diaries, a hybrid story by Walwyn. This is an album that kind of suffers from recency bias in the sense that it probably would be a whole lot higher if I had more time to spend with it. Walwyn is an artist that you guys really, really know that I am high on, and this album is such a refreshing take on that pop punk sound and that emo sound where we get a lot of different energy behind these tracks. We get a track like Enemy where he's talking all about how you made an enemy out of me, and then we get tracks like Stop Living and Don't Dream where we get all this imagery of trying to build a band and go to Warped Tour. But then when we get older, we want to build a band and go to When We Were Young. Like, these are the types of takes that, you know, kind of give us a real refreshing sound. And it's a sound coming out of this scene where it really gives you hope for the future. And when we have up-and-coming artists like Walwyn that are putting out sounds like this, I know that pop punk's in really good hands moving forward. So number 19 is Prius Diaries, a hybrid story by Walwyn. Number 18 is Losing What We Love by Knuckle Puck. This is another one that fits that classic nostalgic pop punk sound. There's a lot of those albums that fit into that category this year, but Knuckle Puck is one that really, to me, doesn't get a whole lot of credit. I feel like, obviously, they've been around for a little bit at this point, and if you say Knuckle Puck to a pop punk or an alt rock fan, they're probably going to know who you're talking about. But when you're asking people who the top bands are in this little subgenre, I guarantee Knuckle Puck's not being used, and that's kind of a travesty to me because these guys continue to put out top tier material. They continue to put out albums that are start to finish some of the best flowing albums that you'll see. And that's exactly what Losing What We Love is. From start to finish, you get this almost perfect flow of song to song to song where it's really not hard to follow along. It's not hard to understand what they're trying to say. You can feel like you're part of this album where these songs are really speaking to you and really capturing some experiences that you may have had in your past or going through currently. And that's what made this album so special for me. And there's a lyric on their song, The Tower, that really stood out as one of my top lyrics of the year. And it says, I have to learn to let go just to regrow. And I think that's a lyric that really resonates in a lot of different ways. You know, sometimes you have to learn to let certain people go or let certain things go in order for you to regrow and be a better version of yourself. And that's what made that lyric so special to me, is that that's something that everybody can relate to. And that's just a cool way of saying, like, sometimes you just have to let things go in order to become a better version of yourself. So checking in at number 18 is Losing What We Love by Knuckle Puck. At number 17, we got Secret Combinations by Bridge the Gap. One of the leaders in the Defend Skate Punk movement, Bridge the Gap, burst onto my radar this year with My Creation and just kind of steadily kept creeping back into my most played songs and most played albums with Secret Combinations. This is easily the best skate punk album of the year. There's no question about it to me. And My Creation was one of my top songs this year. You guys will hear me talk about it a little bit more when we talk about top songs, but this has been one of my favorite discoveries all year, this band. And it's not just My Creation, it's Whippersnapper, it's the title track, Secret Combinations. These are all different songs that really stand out and really help you to understand that skate punk isn't dead either. You know, we always talk about, is pop punk dead? Is this dead? Whatever. And I think people forget that skate punk is really a thing out there, and it should continue to be a thing out there, especially when we have bands like Bridge the Gap that are pioneering that movement. So check out Secret Combinations from Bridge the Gap, my number 17 album on the year. At number 16, we got One More Time by Blink-182. This album from Blink-182 is another one similar to Fall Out Boy's So Much for Stardust, where it almost felt wrong to leave it off the list because of how much I enjoyed it. But at the same time, I know that around that September, October timeframe where One More Time was released, we were getting hammered with new music. And it was very difficult to continue to play certain albums or continue to re-listen to certain albums because everything was just getting pushed so quickly where it felt like I always had to listen to something new. And that's why One More Time falls where it does. One More Time is such a complete album from start to finish. It is also the completion of what I talked about with Fall Out Boy's album, where they kind of started the whole, return of the giants from the pop punk scene in the early 2000s, where we all fell in love with this genre. And Blink-182 kind of completed it. We've kind of gotten all these giants coming back. We've gotten Blink-182 this year with Tom. We've gotten Fall Out Boy returning to form. We've got Paramore, who really hasn't left the scene, but I would say has kind of been just kind of floating on the outside, and now they're back. We got a new EP from Yellowcard and tours from Yellowcard this year, all these different bands. And it really just kind of finishes that off, except for one. I'm looking at you, My Chemical Romance, waiting for you to come out next year with something, but now that we've kind of got that completion, it's interesting to see where this kind of state of the scene goes and where these larger bands end up, because now that they've kind of returned to form and they can tell that everybody still loves it, I'm curious to see what the decision is and what the next step is for them in terms of albums, singles, whatever it may be. So One More Time from Blink-182, checking in at my number 16 album of the year. At number 15, we got Freakin' Nature by Heart Attack Man. This was probably some of the most fun I had with an album this year. Heart Attack Man really had a creativity outburst on this album. There was such an overload of creativity on there that every time I went back to it, even now, I'm still catching things that I'm like, damn, that was really creative. That was really different. I've never heard somebody say something like that before. All the song titles really capture your attention too, and it's really punk and pop punk at its best and at its finest. This is where I tell people all the time, when you go out and you're saying that, pop punk is dead, you're clearly not listening to bands like Heart Attack Man, or you're not looking at bands like Hot Mulligan, or, all these different bands that are coming out now with all this different stuff and seeing the creativity. And once you see that, you can say, okay, yeah, this is the stuff that I grew up with. This is the stuff that I love. And this is still a very prominent genre to us today. So Heart Attack Man with Freakin' Nature coming in at number 15 on the year. Checking in at number 14 on the year is Omen from Of Virtue. When we're talking about some of the most surprising albums of the year to me, Of Virtue definitely stands out. And I don't want that to sound like a slight to Of Virtue. They've always been a really strong band, but they're definitely not a band that I expected to release Omen, and for Omen to have that big of a effect on me. This is an album that I just kept reaching for and I wanted to listen to start to finish. That's what really stands out when I'm talking about my albums of the year is it an album that I continue to go back to? Is it an album that I continue to reach for? And that there are plenty of songs off of there that I have been really listening to a lot. And Of Virtue definitely stood out in that respect this year. Definitely one of the top metalcore albums of the year for me. It's got the heavy lyrics. It's got all these different subject matters that we talk about. It's talking about alcohol. It's talking about depression. And this is just another band that, again, I feel is super, super underrated. They kind of fall in that same category of Knuckle Puck, where I feel like most people, when you talk to them, will know who Of Virtue is, but they won't put them up there in that top tier of talent. And I think that's so wrong. I think Of Virtue is one of the top metalcore acts out right now, one of the top alt-rock acts out as well. And Omen definitely solidifies that spot, at least for me. So checking in at my number 14 album of the year is Omen by Of Virtue. Number 13 is Why Would I Watch by Hot Mulligan. Hot Mulligan is the definition of a fun band and album to listen to. This Why Would I Watch album has been such a treat for me this year. There is so much angst on this album. There's so much anxiety behind some of these lyrics and some of these song titles. There's so much creativity bursting through every song, every title from Hot Mulligan that it makes it an album that you really can't get away from. It's an album that you can't not say, I remembered listening to that. I still listen to Golf Is On, or I still listen to Christ Alive, My Toe, Damn It Hurts, or, all these different titles. And that's where it was so different for me, is that I went back to all these different song titles and listened to them. Now, I am still personally not over the devastation of their track Betty. That is a song that has been fantastic this year, but man, that one still is a killer to listen to. It's hard to listen to. It's super emotional. And if you had a pet or lost a pet this year, listen to that song. It might help you get through that. I know it's a hard song to listen to, but damn, they really did Betty well on that song. And Hot Mulligan has been a top band for me this year. Number 13 on the year, Why Would I Watch by Hot Mulligan. At number 12, we got Out of Isolation by Sam Hauge. Now, this is where I talked about at the beginning of this whole podcast about where you might find somebody up in the top spot where you're not exactly familiar with them, or you're wondering why I have them so high. And this is a perfect example of that. I feel like that a lot of people maybe still haven't discovered Sam Hauge, and I think that's a damn shame, because Sam has all the makings of a really strong artist, especially in this scene. If you haven't heard him yet, you need to go check him out. Sam does most of, if not all of, his music and lyrics and writing and recording by himself. And that's what makes this album stand out to me, is that there is such a crisp sound on every single one of his tracks on Out of Isolation that it's hard not to be impressed with the production and with the work that goes into it. It's pop punk, pop rock, whatever you want to call it. And this is another album that was probably towards the beginning half of the year, and that album has held up all the way throughout. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll see that Sam was actually in my top 5 artists listened to on Spotify and my Spotify Wrapped. And that was really surprising to me, not because of how Sam is as an artist, but just because of how much I listened to throughout the year. That just goes to show how much of an impact Out of Isolation really made on me. And like I said at the top of this review, you definitely need to go check them out. Number 12 album of the year is Out of Isolation by Sam Hauge. At number 11, we got Hard Reset by The Word Alive. This is one of the best heavier albums of the year, and probably one of the heaviest that you guys will hear me talk about, at least this year. It has perfect construction. It has features that just jump off of the paper at you, with Bad Omens in there. You got Loveless on there. You got Escape the Fate on there. You got Normandy on there. You got all these different features that jump out at you as well. And in another year, this album probably would be an easy top 5 candidate for me. But because there was so much music that was released this year, I can't put it any higher than this, just because I had so much of a reaction to these other albums that it really is a hard year for me to rank these. So if you haven't heard, I have a review of The Word Alive's Hard Reset on a previous podcast. Go check it out there. And in the meantime, number 11, checking in, Hard Reset by The Word Alive. Kicking off the top 10, we got Tear Me to Pieces by Story of the Year. So the top 10 for me is all about the consistency in re-listens, consistency in songs that kept popping up for me, and just overall production quality, lyricism, all these different things. And Story of the Year fits that perfectly. I don't think I realized how much I really connected with this album until I went back and started talking about like year-end lists and wanting to look at albums that were there. And when I looked back, I was shocked at how many Story of the Year songs from Tear Me to Pieces made it onto my personal playlist that I listen to a whole lot. You know, it's not just songs like Real Life and Tear Me to Pieces. It's songs like Afterglow and Knives Out. And it really shows how consistent Story of the Year has been throughout their entire career. And seeing them live this year really just kind of solidified that for me. You know, it's not just the fact that Story of the Year still sounds the same as they did back when they dropped Page Avenue. It's that they still have that same energy and that same angst. And you feel like every time you get a new Story of the Year song, it's not going to be a question of, oh God, did they try to change their sound or are they back? No, they never left. They have been the same all the way throughout. That's why I love this album, and that's why it's checking in at number 10 on the year, Tear Me to Pieces by Story of the Year. At number 9, we got Past, Present, Future by Meet Me at the Altar. This is an album that I can probably describe in 3 words. It's fun, it's energetic, and it's edgy. That is the way I would describe not only Meet Me at the Altar, but their sound. One of my favorite songs that they have dropped this year is A Few Tomorrows. It kind of gives you that scaled back version of what this pop rock, pop punk sound is, and it's not always going to be those driving electric guitars or those heavy drum beats or anything like that. Sometimes it's going to be a stripped back, more acoustic style, and that's exactly what we got on A Few Tomorrows with the emotion behind those lyrics. Meet Me at the Altar is a band that I'm really seeing fly up the rankings in top bands out right now. I'm so happy to see that. You know, they are a band that I have a ton of faith in, and I'm glad that they're starting to get some more commercial, national attention, however you want to refer to it. You know, I think hopping on that 5 Seconds of Summer tour is going to do wonders for them next year, and I'm really interested to see what they have up their sleeve for next year. So, number 9 album of the year is Past, Present, Future by Meet Me at the Altar. At number 8, we got Thanks But No Thanks from Can't Swim. Now, if you guys remember back when I did my full review on this album, one of the things that I said about it was that it was a hard listen. And I didn't mean that it was hard to listen to because the sound wasn't good or anything like that. I meant it was a hard listen because of all of the subject matter that was being said throughout. And at the end of the year, I still believe that. You know, I still believe that it's a hard listen because of some of these topics on there that they really just have so much emotion behind. But the storytelling on this is something that just really, really stood out and really made this a top 10 album for me, hands down. You know, these songs that Can't Swim put out this year really give you a way to put yourself in that story or that situation of that song, and you can kind of feel yourself either being the person that, you know, found them face down in the living room or being that person, you know, on the other side. It's just so visual, these songs. They give you such a visual that it's hard not to be kind of engrossed in that. And so that's really what makes this Thanks But No Thanks album from Can't Swim my number 8 album of the year. At number 7, we got The Best Part About Being Human by Bearings. Bearings really have this way of just showing that they are some of the best pop punk, and they're in that pop punk supremacy corner without really making a whole lot of noise about it. They dropped a couple of different songs this year that really stood out right away, and I was like, oh, that is some of the best that I've heard this year. You know, we got Scenery, we got Slip, whatever. But then they dropped this album, and I listened to this album all the way through, and it is just a perfect example of what modern pop punk is. And it's a perfect example of why you can't discount non-American bands either. Like, this is so strong and so good. And one of my favorite songs of the year is one, of course, that I hear nobody talking about. And if you guys have been listening for a while, you know that a lot of times my favorite tracks are not the tracks that are picked for singles. They're not tracks that are, you know, recorded for videos or whatever it may be. My favorite track off this album is Ocean Dream. And that saxophone in there, really, the only way I can describe is it fucking hits. Like, that's the only way I can describe this song and this track, is that it hits. And that's really what made Bearings stand out for me this year, is that every song I turned on had some sort of way of hitting me where I wasn't really expecting it. And that's why The Best Part About Being Human by Bearings is my number 7 album of the year. At number 6, we got the self-titled Archetypes Collide debut album. Now, this is a super high position for a debut album, but damn is it worth it, at least to me. Archetypes Collide exploded this year onto my radar with What If I Fall at the very beginning of the year, and I was ecstatic to hear that we were getting an album from them once I heard that track. The vocal range and display from Kyle on this album really shows the talent not only he has, but that the band has to be able to really show off that range with the music that's behind it. There's heavy things on here. There's emotion behind a lot of these tracks. These tracks make you think a lot. It's not just, that like metalcore hard rock sound. It's all of the themes that come from behind it. I'm going to continue to use What If I Fall as an example. You hear that song and you're like, okay, like I get what it's about. But then if you really think about it, you can probably connect to it. A lot of people have that feeling of, well, what if I do something wrong? What if this is the wrong decision and I let down everybody that's trusted me? What if holding on isn't the right thing to do? And then what if that really causes me to lose everything? And that's why that song has just been such a standout for me this year. But the whole album, even down to the very end where we get a song like Love Again, which is, again, one of my favorite tracks, of course, because nobody else is really talking about it. But that is what makes albums so special. And that's why it's really hard to see that a lot of people don't listen to albums all the way through, is that sometimes you miss out on tracks that you would really connect with just by only listening to the highlights. So number 6 album on the year is Archetypes Collide by Archetypes Collide. Now, before we jump into our top 5, I got to mention 3 honorable mentions, and that's all I have for honorable mentions this year, but there were a ton of good albums that came out this year. The first honorable mention I have is Can't Fucking Wait by Old Neon, another band that kind of burst onto my scene this year and is one that I have a lot of faith in, and I hope a lot of other people check out. Second honorable mention goes to Real Friends with their album Nothing Worse Than Too Late. Another album that I grabbed for a lot this year, but I felt like it almost kind of snuck into that EP category, and we're not doing EPs on the albums list. You'll get EPs a little later this week, so stay tuned for that. And then my third honorable mention album of the year is Truth Decay by Yumi at 6. One of the better hard rock albums this year, and I still love Mixed Emotions from them on this album, but these were 3 that was just right on the edge of getting into the top 20, and with that, we'll jump into our top 5. At number 5, we got Suburban Dictionary by Friend Circle. Friend Circle dropped Suburban Dictionary, and it is a perfect summer vibe album. These guys have a Blink-182 sound, they have a Fall Out Boy sound, they have a great punk sound, whatever you want to call it. And the reason that this album is so high is because there are instant classic songs on there for me that I can see potentially being played 15, 20 years down the road in like the way that we play Sugar We're Going Down or the way that we play All the Small Things. We get songs like Orange Tang and Golden and Don't Wait Up that all really fit that kind of classic sound to me and really become instant classics. It's also what made Friend Circle a top band for me personally, is that they were so effective at delivering all of this stuff that Suburban Dictionary was no way it wasn't being in my top 5. So number 5 album of the year is Suburban Dictionary by Friend Circle. At number 4, we have The Noble Art of Self-Destruction by Holding Absence. This is easily my biggest surprise of the year because Holding Absence is one of those bands that I've always liked and enjoyed, but I didn't expect them to be my number 4 album of the year. And it's somewhere between hard rock, it's somewhere between metalcore, it's somewhere between regular rock, but lyrically everything stood out for me on this one. The lead singles were great, but the whole album is really amazing, and everything ended with just this hopeful nature. Even though we had songs like A Crooked Melody where, we're kind of dwelling on some things and, it's kind of sad, everything ended on a hopeless note, and you can get that in my full review of this album a couple podcasts back. And I'm interested to see where Holding Absence goes from here. If you guys paid attention to the albums that they've released, this last one, The Noble Art of Self-Destruction, was 3 out of 3. So who knows what that means, if we're getting like a new era or a new sound or whatever it may be. Interested to see where Holding Absence goes from here. But as for this year, they have the number 4 album for me with The Noble Art of Self-Destruction. At number 3, we have Take Me Back to Eden by Sleep Token. And this is where the hate's going to start to roll in. I'm fully prepared for it. I know a lot of people are going to tell me that Sleep Token had the best album of the year. And, it was really hard, this top 3 for me. This was not an easy decision for me to decide who the top albums of the year were. Once I got to the top 3, that's really where I struggled to make a decision. But at the end of the day, I came back to what albums did I reach for the most? And Sleep Token fell into third with that. This was such a complete album, start to finish, and the flow was so fantastic. And I think what made Sleep Token drop just a little bit for me was that I felt like I didn't reach for certain songs off the album. I reached for the album itself. And I know a lot of people will say, well, doesn't that make it a superior album? And in some respects, yes, but at the same time, I don't always want to have to spend an hour and a half listening to just one album if there are certain songs that I know that really get me for this. Sleep Token is that band that exploded this year, kind of like Bad Omens did last year. So I'm interested to see who our Bad Omens / Sleep Token is for next year. And maybe I will talk about that on a future podcast and see if we can come up with some names of bands that might do that. But for the time being, my number 3 album of the year is Take Me Back to Eden by Sleep Token. Number 2 album of the year is Retrovision by Honey Revenge. This is the biggest debut that I've seen in a very long time, and easily the biggest impact that a pop punk, pop rock band has had on me in some time. Honey Revenge has this perfect sound already kind of mastered one album in. There are perfect vocals, perfect lyrics, perfect production. You get songs like Murphy's Law and Sensitive that are just such stunners to me. Obviously we got singles like Are You Impressed and Airhead, which are absolute bops, but the whole album really from start to finish is just a collection of spectacular songs, great writing, great production, and this band is destined for massive things. This isn't going to be just they released their first album and it was really good, and then, I think they're going to fall off. No, I don't think we're going to get a sophomore slump from Honey Revenge. I think they are really poised to explode onto the scene next year and really kind of take it by storm and say that, they are one of the top bands in this pop rock, pop punk, alt rock genre. And can't wait to see it. And they have my number 2 album of the year with Retrovision. It's Honey Revenge. That takes us to our number 1 album of the year. This was not an easy decision, but when I looked back, everything added up and it made sense for me to say that my number 1 album of the year was Built to Last by Arrows in Action. Arrows in Action's album came out probably around midsummer time, and you guys know that it was one of my favorites when it came out, and it has kind of stayed there all along. This is an album that I've kind of been playing all throughout the year, and it really fills that pop punk void that I've been looking for. They fill a void of like a Simple Plan or, an All Time Low or a Fall Out Boy or something like that, I grew up with and really connected with, that I felt like I hadn't had for quite some time. And I think that's why I connected so strongly with Built to Last. The album overall, from start to finish, is really strong. And I love the storytelling that you get in it too. You get a song like Over It where you get the perfect breakdown of rent to pay, I'm broke, shoes are down to the soles, bed is still on the floor, and I'm just over it. You also get songs like Learned My Lesson, which again, my favorite song off the album. Nobody else seems to like that song as much as I do, which is quite all right. I'll take Learned My Lesson any day. And that's a song where it's talking all about, I guess I haven't learned my lesson yet, when he's talking to his mom and telling her all these things and, wants to tell her about the toxins in his brain and warn his younger self about the fool he'll come to be, all these different things. And, it's kind of rare that I get an album that hits me the way that Built to Last did. I think it's one that just stood out because of the production. It's one that stood out because of the sound, stood out because of the lyrics. And Arrows is another band that I have a lot of faith in being one of the next big things in this genre. I think, between them and Honey Revenge and Magnolia Park and Loveless and First and Forever, I think that's kind of like that next level of stardom. and those are going to be the next kind of coming of the Blink-182s, the Fall Out Boys, the Simple Plans, things like that. So overall, that's what makes Built to Last by Arrows in Action my number one album of the year. So there you have it. The Matrix Music Review top 20 albums of the year, with 3 that I couldn't talk about in the top 20 because they were released too late, and 3 honorable mentions. So definitely want to know what you guys think about my list. I want to know what was your guys' top album of the year. You can do all of that over on Instagram, where I'm most active, at Matrix Music Review. You can follow us on Twitter and TikTok at the same handle, at Matrix Music Review. If you're listening on Apple Music or Spotify, leave 5 stars, leave a like, leave us a comment, let me know what your top album of the year was, and I will see you guys later this week with EPs, songs, and other podcasts for the end of 2023 and looking forward to 2024. See you guys soon.